The iron horseshoe slipped from Helena's trembling fingers and clattered against the anvil, drawing every eye in the Ash Fork, Arizona blacksmith shop to her scarred hands that had once dealt cards in the finest saloon this side of the Mississippi. It was April of 1878, and the desert sun beat down mercilessly on the small Arizona town, baking the dusty streets until they shimmered with heat. Helena Grayson had arrived on the morning stage 3 days prior, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and the weight of a reputation that had traveled faster than any locomotive. She had hoped for anonymity in this remote settlement, but hope was a luxury women like her could rarely afford. The blacksmith, a barrel-chested man named Murphy, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Madam, perhaps this work is too demanding for someone of your delicate constitution." Helena wanted to laugh at the word delicate. There was nothing delicate about surviving what she had survived. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. "I can learn, Mr. Murphy. I have steady hands and I'm a quick study." Before Murphy could respond, the shop door swung open with enough force to rattle the tools hanging on the wall. Reverend Josiah Pierce stood in the doorway, his black coat dusty from the street, his narrow face pinched with righteous indignation. Behind him, Helena could see several townswomen gathered, their faces expressing various degrees of curiosity and condemnation. "Murphy," the Reverend's voice rang out like a death knell. "Surely you are not considering employing this woman in your establishment." Murphy shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. "Reverend, I have not made any decisions." "That woman has a past," Reverend Pierce declared, pointing an accusatory finger at Helena. His voice carried into the street, ensuring maximum audience for his pronouncement. "She worked in the gambling halls of Tombstone. She consorted with outlaws and gunfighters. She brought shame upon herself and has no place among decent, God-fearing people." Helena felt her face flush hot, but not with shame. Anger coursed through her veins like liquid fire. She had left Tombstone precisely to escape her past, to build something new. But the past, it seemed, had claws that reached across state lines and desert valleys. "Reverend Pierce," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest, "I have done nothing illegal. I work to survive, as we all must. I seek only honest employment and a chance to live quietly." "Quietly?" The Reverend's lip curled. "Women of your sort know nothing of quiet living. You bring corruption and sin wherever you go. I warned the boarding house proprietor about renting you a room, and I warn every business owner in this town. Employ her at your own moral peril." Murphy looked between Helena and the Reverend, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "Miss Grayson, I'm sorry. Perhaps you should seek opportunities elsewhere." Helena nodded once, sharply, and gathered her shawl around her shoulders despite the heat. She walked toward the door, and the Reverend stepped aside with exaggerated care, as if her very proximity might contaminate him. The townswomen in the street parted like the Red Sea, their whispers following her like angry wasps. She made her way down the main street, past the general store where the proprietor watched her through the window with suspicious eyes, past the small restaurant where she had been refused service that morning, past the church with its whitewashed walls that gleamed accusingly in the sunlight. At the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrub brush and red rock formations, Helena finally stopped and allowed herself a moment of despair. She had fled Tombstone after witnessing a shooting that had left her employer dead and his establishment burned to the ground. She had testified against the men responsible, had done what the law required, and for her honesty, she had received death threats and a reputation that marked her as surely as a brand marks cattle. The gambling, the card dealing, the late nights in smoke-filled rooms, all of it had been necessity, not choice. But no one cared about the why of a woman's past, only the what. Helena was contemplating her dwindling funds and limited options when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the north. She turned to see a rider emerging from the shimmering heat, leading a pack mule laden with furs and supplies. As he drew closer, she could make out details that made her breath catch slightly in her throat. The man was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, tied back loosely with a leather cord. His arms, bare beneath a rolled-up shirt, were corded with muscle, the kind that came from years of hard labor in unforgiving terrain. A thick beard covered his jaw, but his eyes, when they met hers, were a startling clear gray, like winter ice on a mountain lake. He slowed his horse as he approached, and Helena realized she was staring. She quickly looked away, but not before she saw the corner of his mouth lift slightly. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in her chest. "Good afternoon," Helena replied, trying to regain her composure. The man swung down from his horse with easy grace despite his size, and stood there studying her with an intensity that should have been unsettling, but somehow was not. "You look like you have had a difficult day." Helena laughed, a bitter sound. "You could say that." "Hampton Xavier," he introduced himself, extending a hand that was calloused and scarred from hard use. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His grip was firm but careful, as if he was very aware of his own strength. "Helena Grayson." Recognition flickered in his eyes, and Helena braced herself for the inevitable judgment, but instead, Hampton simply nodded. "I heard about you." "I imagine you have heard quite a lot," Helena said, defensive wall slamming into place. "Heard you stood up to the Clanton gang in Tombstone," Hampton said, surprising her. "Heard you testified when others were too scared. Heard you near got yourself killed for telling the truth." Helena stared at him. "That is not the version most people are spreading." "Most people are fools," Hampton said matter-of-factly. He glanced toward town, then back at her. "Let me guess, Reverend Pierce? Is my humiliation so obvious? Pierce has been running off anyone he deems unworthy since he arrived here 2 years ago. Man has more judgment than mercy, which makes him a poor excuse for a preacher in my estimation." Hampton stroked his horse's neck absently. "What were you looking for? Work?" "I was," Helena admitted, "though it seems the Reverend has ensured I will find none here." Hampton was quiet for a moment, appearing to wrestle with some internal debate. Finally, he said, "I have a cabin about 15 miles north of here, up in the mountains. I hunt, trap, bring furs and meat into town every few weeks. I have been needing help processing the hides, preserving meat, managing supplies. The work is hard and the isolation is complete, but it is honest work, and I pay fair." Helena felt her heart begin to pound. "You are offering me employment after what you have heard." "I am offering you a chance," Hampton corrected, "same as someone once offered me." "I do not understand." Hampton's jaw tightened and shadows passed behind his gray eyes. "That woman has a past," the Reverend said. "Well, good. She will understand mine." He met her gaze squarely. "I was a soldier once, Miss Grayson, fought in the war. Did things I am not proud of, saw things that still wake me in the night. After Appomattox I drifted, got into trouble, spent time in a territorial prison for something I did not do. By the time they figured out the truth, I had lost everything. My family would not speak to me. Decent society wanted nothing to do with me. So I came here, to the mountains, and I built a life from nothing." Helena felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension she had been carrying so long she had forgotten it was there. Here was someone who understood, someone who knew what it meant to be judged for circumstances beyond your control. "People with pasts need to stick together," Hampton continued. "We understand that redemption is not given, it is built one day at a time. So, Miss Grayson, what do you say? Are you willing to work hard and live simply?" "Yes," Helena said without hesitation. "Yes, I am." Hampton nodded once. "Gather your things. We will leave within the hour. I want to make it to the foothills before dark." Helena practically ran back to the boarding house, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The proprietor, Mrs. Hadley, looked surprised to see her moving with such purpose. "You are leaving, Miss Grayson?" "I have found employment," Helena said, quickly gathering her few possessions into her carpet bag. Mrs. Hadley's eyebrows rose. "Oh? And who in this town has defied Reverend Pierce?" "No one in this town," Helena replied, unable to keep the satisfaction from her voice. "I will be working for Hampton Xavier at his mountain cabin." The color drained from Mrs. Hadley's face. "The mountain man? Miss Grayson, you cannot be serious. Living alone with a man, unmarried, in complete isolation, your reputation will be utterly destroyed." Helena almost laughed at the absurdity. "Mrs. Hadley, according to Reverend Pierce and most of this town, I have no reputation left to destroy. At least in the mountains, I will have honest work and a chance to live without constant judgment." "But he is a convicted criminal," Mrs. Hadley hissed, as if the walls might hear. He was falsely imprisoned and later exonerated, Helena corrected sharply. But I imagine that detail gets left out when people gossip, just as the truth of my own circumstances has been conveniently forgotten. She closed her carpetbag with a decisive snap. Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Hadley. I will be going now. She paid what she owed and left without looking back. Hampton was waiting at the edge of town with his horse and mule, and he had procured a gentle mare for her to ride. As Helena approached, she saw Reverend Pierce striding toward them, his face flushed with anger. Xavier, the Reverend called out, surely you are not so foolish as to take this woman into your home. Hampton finished adjusting the mare's stirrups and turned to face the Reverend with deliberate slowness. When he straightened to his full height, he towered over Pierce by nearly a foot. Reverend, I believe Jesus had some thoughts about casting the first stone. You might want to review those passages. Do not quote scripture at me, Pierce sputtered. I am trying to protect the moral fiber of this community. No, Hampton said, his voice hard as granite. You are trying to control people through fear and judgment. There is a difference. He helped Helena mount the mare with easy strength, his hands steady at her waist. Miss Grayson is in my employ now and under my protection. Anyone who wishes to continue spreading lies about her character will answer to me. Are we clear? The Reverend's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. The few townspeople who had gathered to watch the confrontation shifted uncomfortably. Everyone in Ashfork knew that Hampton Xavier was not a man to cross. He was scrupulously honest in his dealings, never caused trouble in town, but there was an edge to him, a barely leashed power that suggested violence was always an option, even if it was never his first choice. You will both be damned, Pierce finally managed. Then we will have company, Hampton replied dryly. He swung onto his own horse and gathered the mule's lead. Miss Grayson, ready? Yes, Helena said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They rode north out of Ashfork, leaving behind the whispers and the judgment and the small-minded cruelty of people who had never had to fight for survival. The terrain changed gradually as they traveled, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed to set the very air on fire. Hampton rode in comfortable silence, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning her about rough patches in the trail. Helena found herself relaxing in increments, the tension draining from her shoulders as the distance between her and Ashfork increased. The rhythmic motion of the horse, the warm, dry air, the vast openness of the landscape, it all combined to create a sense of possibility she had not felt in a very long time. How long have you lived in the mountains? She asked after they had been riding for over an hour. 5 years. Hampton replied. Built the cabin with my own hands, one log at a time. First winter nearly killed me because I did not know what I was doing. But I learned, adapted, survived. Do you ever get lonely? Hampton was quiet for a moment. Yes, he admitted. But loneliness is better than being surrounded by people who hate you for things you did not do or cannot change. At least in the mountains, the solitude is honest. Helena understood exactly what he meant. How often do you come into town? Every 2 or 3 weeks, depending on the season and what I need. I sell my furs, buy supplies, and leave as quickly as possible. Some of the shopkeepers are decent enough. Murphy is not a bad man, just weak. Same with the general store owner. They want to be kind but are too afraid of Pierce and the church ladies to follow their own conscience. That must be frustrating. It is human nature, Hampton said with a shrug of his massive shoulders. People want to belong, to be accepted. They will sacrifice their principles for the comfort of the herd. I stopped expecting better a long time ago. They rode higher into the foothills as the sun touched the horizon. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Hampton led them off the main trail onto a narrower path that wound between towering rock formations. The red stone glowed in the fading light, and Helena caught glimpses of ancient petroglyphs carved into protected overhangs. The Apache consider these mountains sacred, Hampton said, following her gaze. I have an understanding with the local bands. I do not overhunt. I respect the land, and they leave me in peace. Sometimes we trade. They are better neighbors than most white men I have known. As darkness fell, they made camp in a small clearing sheltered by high rocks. Hampton moved with efficient competence, unsaddling the horses, building a fire, setting coffee to boil. Helena tried to help, but he waved her off. "You have had a difficult day. Rest. Tomorrow you can start earning your keep." She sank down onto a smooth rock near the fire, watching him work. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw, the breadth of his shoulders, the careful precision of his movements despite his size. She found herself wondering about his past, about the details he had not shared. What had he done in the war? What had landed him in prison? What ghosts haunted his dreams? As if sensing her thoughts, Hampton glanced up and their eyes met across the fire. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Hampton poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. "Tomorrow will be easier," he said quietly. "First days are always the hardest." "Thank you," Helena said, and she meant it for so much more than just the coffee. "For giving me a chance, for believing me, for not judging me." Hampton settled onto the ground across from her, his long legs stretched toward the fire. "We all deserve a chance to start over, Miss Grayson. Lord knows I needed one." They talked late into the night, their conversation ranging from the practical matters of the work ahead to more philosophical discussions about justice, redemption, and second chances. Helena found herself opening up in ways she had not expected, telling Hampton about her childhood in Missouri, her parents' deaths from cholera, her desperate journey west in search of work. She explained how she had ended up dealing cards in Tombstone, how the work had been lucrative enough to save money, how she had planned to eventually buy a small shop or boarding house of her own. Hampton listened without interruption, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight, his expression thoughtful but never judgmental. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "My father was a Methodist minister," he said, surprising her. "Grew up hearing sermons about sin and salvation every day of my life. Joined the Union Army at 17, full of righteous conviction and certainty. I thought I knew exactly what God wanted, what was right and wrong." He stared into the fire, his jaw tight. "War has a way of destroying certainty. I did things in the name of duty that I would give anything to undo. Saw my friends die in ways no human should die. And when it was over, I came home to find my father had died while I was gone, and my mother blamed me for not being there." "That was not fair to you," Helena said softly. "Fever. Fair does not matter when someone needs a target for their grief," Hampton replied. "I drifted after that, got into a fight in a saloon in New Mexico, defended a Mexican man who was being beaten by 3 drunks. I won the fight, but the men I fought had connections. Next thing I knew, I was arrested for stealing horses I had never touched. The men I had beaten testified against me, and the judge believed them over me. I spent 18 months in territorial prison before a lawyer finally proved the actual thieves had already been caught and convicted in Texas." 18 months, Helena breathed, "for something you did not do." "They offered me a pardon and apologies," Hampton said, his voice bitter, "as if that could give me back the time or repair what those months did to me. Prisons are not designed for rehabilitation, Miss Grayson. They are designed to break men. I survived, but not unchanged." "Yet you still have compassion," Helena observed. "You still choose to help others. That speaks to your character." Hampton looked at her then, really looked at her, and Helena felt something shift in the air between them. "Maybe we recognize in each other what we need to see in ourselves," he said quietly. "Proof that our pasts do not have to define our futures." They sat in companionable silence after that, finishing their coffee as the fire burned down to embers. When Hampton finally banked the fire and laid out bedrolls on opposite sides of the camp, Helena felt safer than she had in months. Here, in the wilderness with a man she had just met, she felt more protected than she ever had in civilized society. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the air crisp with the coolness that came before the desert sun reasserted its dominance. They broke camp quickly and continued their journey, climbing higher into the mountains. The vegetation changed again, juniper giving way to ponderosa pine, the air growing noticeably thinner. Around midday, they crested a ridge, and Hampton pointed to a valley below. "There," he said simply. Helena looked and caught her breath. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, backed up against a sheer rock face that provided shelter from the wind. A stream ran along one side of the property, its water crystal clear and swift. There was a corral for the horses, a sturdy shed for supplies, and the cabin itself, built from massive logs that had been fitted together with obvious skill. "It is beautiful," Helena said honestly. "It is home," Hampton replied, and she heard pride in his voice. They descended into the valley, and as they drew closer, Helena could see the care Hampton had taken with every detail. The cabin had a covered porch that wrapped around two sides, providing shade and a place to sit. The windows had real glass, a luxury in such a remote location, and the door hung perfectly straight on its hinges. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and Helena realized he must have banked a fire before leaving for town days earlier. Hampton helped her dismount and led her inside. The cabin was a single large room with a sleeping loft above. The furniture was handmade but well crafted, a sturdy table, chairs, a bed frame, shelves lining the walls. A cast-iron stove sat in one corner, its surface showing the patina of regular use. Furs and blankets were stacked neatly, and bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with a pleasant earthy scent. "The loft will be yours," Hampton said, gesturing upward. "It is private and warm. I will sleep down here. There is a bathing area behind the cabin where the stream pools naturally. Water is cold but clean. Privy is behind the shed downwind." Helena set her carpetbag down, looking around with growing appreciation. "You built all of this yourself?" "Every inch," Hampton confirmed. "Took the better part of 2 years to get it the way I wanted. But I had nothing but time, and the work kept me sane." He moved to the stove and stoked the fire back to life. "I will show you around properly, explain your duties. But first, food. You've been eating nothing but hardtack and jerky for days, I would wager." He was right, and Helena's stomach growled in agreement. Hampton cooked with the same efficient competence he brought to everything else, producing a hearty stew from dried meat and vegetables that tasted better than anything she had eaten in weeks. They ate at the table, and Helena found herself studying him in the better light of the cabin interior. Hampton Xavier was perhaps 30 years old, though hard living might have aged him prematurely. His hands, scarred and calloused, were nevertheless careful and precise as he handled his eating utensils. His movements were controlled, almost cautious, as if he was constantly aware of his own strength and the potential damage it could cause. But his eyes, those winter-gray eyes, held a depth of intelligence and perception that suggested he saw far more than he spoke. After the meal, Hampton showed her the work areas. Behind the cabin was a large space set up for processing furs and hides. There were stretching frames, cutting tables, and barrels for various stages of tanning. The work was indeed physically demanding, requiring strength, patience, and attention to detail. "I will teach you each step," Hampton said. "Some of it is unpleasant, but all of it is necessary. The better we process the furs, the more money we get in town. I split profits 50-50 with anyone who works for me." Helena blinked in surprise. 50-50? That is more than generous." "It is fair," Hampton corrected. "You will be doing half the work. You should receive half the profit. I have no use for money beyond what I need to survive. The rest goes into the bank in Flagstaff, saving for a future I have not quite figured out yet." They spent the rest of the day with Hampton teaching and Helena learning. He was a patient instructor, showing her techniques multiple times without frustration when she struggled. By the time the sun began to set, Helena's arms ached and her hands were sore, but she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was real work, tangible results, honest labor that left her tired but fulfilled. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Helena felt something she had not experienced in years: peace. The mountains were silent except for the gentle sounds of the stream and the occasional call of a night bird. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and beside her Hampton sat with his long legs stretched out, his massive frame relaxed, his presence solid and reassuring. "Thank you," she said into the comfortable silence, "for all of this, for seeing past what others chose to see." Hampton turned his head to look at her. "You're welcome. And Helena." It was the first time he had used her given name. "You're safe here. Whatever else happens, whatever challenges come, You are safe. I give you my word." She believed him. And that night, climbing the ladder to the loft, settling into the comfortable bed he had prepared, listening to the sound of him moving quietly below, Helena slept without nightmares for the first time in months. The days that followed established a rhythm that Helena found deeply satisfying. She woke with the sun, climbed down from the loft to find Hampton already up and coffee brewed. They would eat a simple breakfast together, discussing the day's tasks, then set to work. Hampton hunted in the early mornings, bringing back deer, elk, and smaller game that needed processing. Helena learned to skin animals without damaging the pelts, to scrape hides clean, to prepare them for tanning. The work was difficult and often messy, but Hampton never talked down to her or suggested it was beyond her capabilities. In the afternoons, he taught her to shoot, starting with a small rifle and working up to larger weapons. Every person living in isolated country needs to know how to defend themselves, he explained, not just from people, but from animals. Mountain lions, bears, wolves, they all live in these mountains, and they do not always respect human boundaries. Helena proved to be a quick study, her hands steady and her eyes sharp. Hampton praised her progress, and she found herself warmed by his approval in ways that surprised her. She began to notice small things about him, the way he hummed tunelessly while working, the careful way he handled injured animals before dispatching them quickly and humanely, the gentleness with which he treated the horses and even the mule. One evening, 3 weeks after her arrival, a summer storm rolled through the mountains with dramatic fury. Thunder echoed off the rock faces like cannon fire, and lightning split the sky in jagged, brilliant forks. Rain pounded on the cabin roof with deafening intensity. Helena had climbed down from the loft, unnerved by the violence of the storm, and found Hampton standing at the window watching the display. "It is magnificent," he said, his voice nearly drowned by the thunder. "It is terrifying," Helena countered, but she moved to stand beside him. "Both can be true," Hampton replied. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face in stark relief, and Helena saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "Do you know what I love about storms like this? They are honest. No pretense, no hidden agenda, just pure natural force, doing what it was meant to do." "Unlike people," Helena said softly. "Unlike people," Hampton agreed. He glanced down at her, and in the flickering lightning, his gray eyes seemed to glow. "Though there are exceptions." "Am I an exception?" The question escaped before Helena could stop it, too personal, too revealing. Hampton did not look away. "Yes," he said simply. "You are honest, Helena. You work hard. You do not complain. You do not pretend to be something you are not. It is refreshing." "You are honest, too," Helena replied. Her heart was beating faster, and she was acutely aware of how close they were standing, how the heat seemed to radiate from his large frame. "And kind, and patient. You are a good man, Hampton Xavier." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in his usual careful control. "I'm not sure good is the right word, but I'm trying. Every day I'm trying to be better than I was." The storm raged around them, but inside the cabin, a different kind of electricity was building. Helena could feel it in the air between them, a tension that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with awareness. She knew she should step back, maintain propriety, but she found herself unable to move. "Helena," Hampton said, her name rough in his throat, "I need you to know I brought you here to help you, to give you a safe place. I have no expectations, no ulterior motives. You are free to leave whenever you wish." "What if I do not wish to leave?" Helena heard herself ask. Hampton's jaw tightened, and she saw his hands clench at his sides. "Then you are welcome to stay as long as you like. But I need you to understand something. I am drawn to you, more than I should be, more than is wise. So if you want to keep things professional between us, you need to tell me now, and I will respect that boundary absolutely." Helena's breath caught. She should be cautious, should protect herself, should maintain the distance that safety required. But when had safety ever brought her anything but loneliness? And Hampton, this scarred, damaged, honorable man, had shown her more respect and kindness than anyone in her recent memory. "What if I do not want boundaries?" she whispered. Hampton closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, the intensity there made her stomach flip. "Then we are both in trouble," he said. But he reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and cupped her face with one large, calloused hand. His touch was feather-light, almost reverent. "You deserve better than a broken-down ex-convict living in the middle of nowhere. You deserve better than a card dealer with a ruined reputation," Helena countered. She lifted her own hand and placed it over his, pressing his palm more firmly against her cheek. "Maybe we deserve each other." The kiss, when it came, was inevitable as the storm itself. Hampton bent his head, and Helena rose on her toes to meet him halfway. His lips were surprisingly soft against hers, the kiss starting gentle, almost questioning. But when Helena made a small sound of encouragement and slid her arms around his neck, something broke loose in both of them. Hampton wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her effortlessly off her feet, pulling her against the solid wall of his chest. The kiss deepened, became hungry, months of loneliness and longing pouring out from both of them. Helena threaded her fingers through his long hair, marveling at the silky texture, at the contrast between his obvious physical power and the careful control he maintained even now. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hampton set her down gently and rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day I met you," he admitted. "I have wanted you to," Helena replied truthfully. They stood there wrapped in each other's arms as the storm gradually spent its fury, and Helena felt something settle deep in her chest. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it, not just safety, not just honest work, but connection. Someone who saw her, truly saw her, and chose her anyway. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened and evolved. They worked side by side during the day, learning each other's rhythms and habits, developing the kind of wordless communication that came from true partnership. In the evenings, they sat close on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their futures. Hampton told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about his complicated relationship with faith after being raised by a preacher father, about the friends he had lost in the war. Helena shared memories of her parents, the pain of their loss, her determination to survive no matter what obstacles she faced. They found they had more in common than either expected. Both had been judged harshly by society. Both had been forced to reinvent themselves. Both carried scars that were not visible to the eye. The physical side of their relationship progressed slowly, Hampton always careful to respect her comfort and boundaries. They kissed often, long, deep kisses that left them both shaken, but he never pushed for more. It was Helena who finally climbed down from the loft one night 2 months after her arrival and slipped into his bed. "Are you sure?" Hampton asked, his voice rough with desire, but his eyes searching hers for any hint of doubt. "I have never been more sure of anything," Helena replied. That night, Hampton loved her with a tenderness that made her cry. His large hands impossibly gentle on her body, his strength held in perfect check, his focus entirely on her pleasure. Afterward, lying in his arms listening to his heartbeat, Helena felt a completeness she had never experienced. This was what it meant to be truly seen, truly known, truly cherished. "I love you," Hampton whispered into her hair. "I did not plan to, did not think I was capable of it anymore. But I love you, Helena Grayson." "I love you too," Helena replied, and felt his arms tighten around her. "I did not come to these mountains looking for love. I came looking for survival. But I found both." As summer turned toward fall, they settled into domestic contentment that felt almost surreal in its simplicity. They were partners in every sense, working together, making decisions together, building a life together. Hampton taught Helena to read animal tracks, to predict weather changes, to navigate the mountain trails. Helena introduced organization to his supply system, improved his cooking beyond simple stews, and brought laughter into spaces that had been silent for too long. They made love frequently, learning each other's bodies with thorough attention, finding joy in both passion and tenderness. Hampton was an attentive lover, always focused on her pleasure, and Helena discovered aspects of herself she had not known existed. With Hampton, she felt free to be vulnerable, to ask for what she wanted, to give herself completely without fear of judgment or exploitation. It was late September when they made their next trip to Ash Fork for supplies. Hampton had been reluctant to return to town, knowing they would face judgment and gossip, but Helena had surprised him with her calm insistence. I am not ashamed of what we have built, she told him as they loaded the horses. I am not ashamed of you or us or the life we are living. Let them talk. Their opinions do not change the truth. Still, Hampton insisted on making the journey with her, his protective instincts fully engaged. They rode into Ash Fork on a cool morning, the air crisp with the promise of coming winter. As expected, their arrival caused quite a stir. People stopped mid-conversation to stare. Women clutched their shawls tighter and pulled their children close. Men whispered behind their hands. Hampton ignored them all, helping Helena dismount in front of the general store with obvious care and affection. His hand lingered at her waist, and he bent to murmur something in her ear that made her smile. It was a clear declaration to anyone watching. They were together, and he was not ashamed of it. Inside the store, the proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, looked uncomfortable but greeted them civilly. Mr. Xavier, Miss Grayson, what can I help you with today? They gave him their list, and as Jenkins gathered their supplies, Hampton noticed the man kept glancing toward the door nervously. Sure enough, within minutes, Reverend Pierce swept into the store like an avenging angel. Xavier, the Reverend's voice dripped with disdain, I see you have brought your shame into town for all to witness. Hampton straightened to his full, imposing height, but his voice remained calm. Reverend, we are here to purchase supplies and conduct business. I suggest you move aside. That woman has been living with you in sin for months, Pierce declared, his face flushing red. You compound her wickedness with your own. You bring disgrace upon this entire community. No one asked you to think about what we do in the privacy of our own home, Hampton replied, his tone sharpening. And no one appointed you judge of how others choose to live. God appointed me, Pierce shot back. God must have lower standards than I thought, Hampton said dryly. Helena bit back a laugh, which only infuriated the Reverend further. You mock the Lord. I mock you, Hampton corrected. There is a difference. He turned his back on the Reverend, a deliberate dismissal, and addressed Jenkins. Are our supplies ready? Nearly, Jenkins said, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Pierce, apparently unable to leave well enough alone, reached out and grabbed Hampton's arm. It was a mistake. Hampton moved with startling speed for a man his size, spinning and catching the Reverend's wrist in an iron grip. Do not touch me, Hampton said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. And do not presume to interfere in my life or Helena's. We have harmed no one. We have broken no laws. We are simply living as we choose, which is more than I can say for most people in this town who sacrifice their own desires for fear of your judgment. He released the Reverend's wrist, pushing him back slightly. Pierce stumbled, then recovered, his face now purple with rage. You are both going to hell. Then we will keep each other warm, Hampton replied. He gathered their supplies, paid Jenkins, and nodded to Helena. Come on, we have better places to be. They were loading their horses when a young woman approached hesitantly. She was perhaps 20, plainly dressed, with anxious eyes that darted back toward a group of women watching from across the street. Miss Grayson? She said softly. Helena turned. Yes? I just wanted to say, I think you are very brave, and I hope you are happy. The words came out in a rush, as if the young woman was afraid she would lose her nerve. Some of us understand that not everyone's story is simple, and that judging others is easier than examining our own lives. Helena felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. That means more than you know. The young woman smiled quickly, then hurried away before anyone could associate too closely with the town pariahs. But her words stayed with Helena during the entire ride back to the cabin, a reminder that kindness existed even in unexpected places. That night, lying in Hampton's arms, Helena said, I want to marry you. She felt Hampton's body tense in surprise. What? I want to marry you, Helena repeated, propping herself up on one elbow to look at him in the dim firelight. Not because of what people say, or to make our situation respectable in the eyes of society, but because I love you. And I want everyone to know that I choose you, that you choose me, that we are building something real and permanent. Hampton's gray eyes searched her face. Helena, marriage will not change how people see us. If anything, it might make things worse. They will say I coerced you, or that you are trying to secure my property. I do not care what they say, Helena insisted. Do you want to marry me? That is the only question that matters. Hampton reached up and cupped her face with his large hand, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. "I want nothing more than to call you my wife, but I will not have you married by Reverend Pierce. I would not give that man the satisfaction." "Then we will find someone else," Helena said practically. "There must be other ministers, other officials who can perform the ceremony." "There is a justice of the peace in Flagstaff," Hampton said slowly. "Fellow I met a few years back. Decent man, does not ask too many questions. We could ride there, be married properly, and file the papers legally." "Then let us do it," Helena said. "Let us start the next chapter of our lives." They made the journey to Flagstaff 2 weeks later, traveling for 3 days through increasingly cold weather. Flagstaff was a proper town, much larger than Ash Fork, with a railroad station and multiple streets of businesses. The justice of the peace, a weathered man named Carlson, remembered Hampton and raised no objections to performing the ceremony. "You both of legal age and sound mind?" he asked, looking between them. "Yes, sir," they answered in unison. "Anyone forcing either of you into this union?" "No, sir," Helena said firmly. "This is entirely our choice." Carlson nodded. "Then I see no reason to delay. Do you have witnesses?" Hampton had anticipated this and recruited 2 of Carlson's clerks to stand witness. The ceremony itself was brief and pragmatic, but when Hampton slid a simple gold band onto Helena's finger and repeated the vows that bound them together legally and morally, she felt the significance of the moment settle over her like a blessing. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Carlson declared. "Mr. Xavier, you may kiss your bride." Hampton pulled Helena into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, seemingly unconcerned with their small audience. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "Mrs. Xavier," Hampton said, testing the name. "Mr. Xavier," Helena replied, and laughed with pure joy. They filed the marriage certificate at the county office, ensuring their union was legally documented, then spent their wedding night in a hotel room that was luxurious compared to their mountain cabin. Hampton made love to his wife with reverence and passion, and Helena fell asleep in his arms, feeling more complete than she had ever imagined possible. Winter arrived early in the mountains that year, with the first serious snow falling in mid-October. Hampton and Helena spent the cold months in comfortable isolation, the cabin warm and secure, their supplies plentiful. They passed the long evenings reading aloud to each other from Hampton's small collection of books, playing cards, making love, and talking about their future. "I have been thinking," Hampton said one night as they lay in bed, listening to the wind howl outside, "about expanding, maybe building a second cabin, offering guided hunting trips to wealthy men from back east. I have the skills, and you have the organizational ability to make it work. We could build something significant here." "I like that idea," Helena said, running her fingers through his long hair. "Though, I have a question. Would you ever want to return to Pennsylvania? To see your mother? To try to reconcile?" Hampton was quiet for a long moment. "I have thought about it," he admitted, "but I am not sure she would want to see me. The last words she spoke to me were cruel, blaming me for my father's death, for the war, for everything wrong in her life. I am not sure that kind of wound heals." "People change," Helena said gently. "And now you could introduce her to your wife. Show her that you have built a good life. Maybe that would help her see you differently." "Maybe," Hampton said, but he sounded doubtful. Spring came eventually, as it always does, melting the snow and coaxing green life from the frozen ground. Helena discovered she was pregnant in April, the signs unmistakable. When she told Hampton, he looked stunned, then terrified, then elated in rapid succession. "A child," he breathed, his large hand settling gently on her still flat stomach. "Helena, are you certain?" "I am certain," she confirmed. "Are you happy?" "I am terrified," Hampton admitted. "I never thought I would be a father, never thought I deserved that kind of happiness, but yes, I am happy. So incredibly happy." He pulled her into his arms carefully, as if she might break. "I will do everything in my power to be a good father, to give our child the kind of life we never had." "I know you will," Helena said, and she meant it absolutely. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Hampton hovered over her with protective concern that was both endearing and occasionally exasperating. He refused to let her do heavy work, took over most of the household tasks, and watched her constantly for any signs of distress. Helena bore his anxiety with patience, understanding that his fear came from love. They made one more trip to Ash Fork that summer, needing to stock up on supplies before the baby arrived. The town's reaction to their marriage certificate, which Hampton carried and showed to anyone who questioned their relationship, was mixed. Some people, like Jenkins at the general store, warmed slightly, offering cautious congratulations on the coming child. Others, particularly Reverend Pierce and his most devoted followers, remained hostile. But Helena noticed something had shifted. The young woman who had spoken to her months earlier now greeted her openly. A few other townspeople nodded in passing. Even Murphy, the blacksmith, stopped Hampton on the street to shake his hand and wish them well. "You are gaining respectability," Helena teased on the ride home. "Or people are simply getting used to us being around," Hampton replied. "But I will take it, especially with a child coming. I want our son or daughter to have opportunities we never had, to be accepted, not shunned." Their son was born on a cold November night, arriving fast and fierce like a mountain storm. Hampton delivered the baby himself, having no choice with the nearest doctor days away, his hands steady despite his obvious terror. When he placed the squalling infant on Helena's chest, tears streamed down his bearded face. "A boy," he said, his voice choked, "a perfect, healthy boy." "Henry," Helena said, stroking the baby's dark hair, "Henry Gabriel Xavier." Hampton nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then he bent and kissed his wife's forehead, then his son's. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me a family, for giving me a reason to be better than I was." Young Henry thrived, growing strong and healthy on his mother's milk and his parents' abundant love. Hampton proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with the infant, singing old songs in his deep voice, rocking the baby to sleep against his broad chest. Helena watched her husband transform even further, the hard edges softening, the shadows in his eyes retreating. When Henry was 6 months old, Helena broached the subject of Pennsylvania again. "I think we should go," she said. "You, me, and Henry. We should visit your mother, let her meet her grandson. Even if she remains cold, at least you will know you tried, and Henry deserves to know his grandmother." Hampton wrestled with the decision for weeks, but eventually agreed. They made the long journey east by train, a new and slightly overwhelming experience for both of them. The country was changing rapidly, the wild frontier giving way to settlements and cities connected by ribbons of steel rail. Pennsylvania in autumn was beautiful, the leaves turning brilliant colors, the air crisp and cool. Hampton's childhood home was a modest house on the edge of a small town, and as they approached, Helena could feel the tension radiating from her husband. An older woman answered the door, her hair gray, her face lined with age and what looked like perpetual sadness. Her eyes widened when she saw Hampton, shock and disbelief warring across her features. "Henry," she whispered, using his given name. "Hello, Mother," Hampton said, his voice carefully neutral. "May we come in?" "Mrs." Xavier's gaze moved from her son to Helena to the baby in her arms. "You are married? You have a child? This is my wife, Helena, and our son, Henry, your grandson." Hampton's jaw was tight, prepared for rejection. But something unexpected happened. Mrs. Xavier's face crumpled, tears spilling down her weathered cheeks. "Oh, my boy, I'm so sorry. I said terrible things, unforgivable things. I blamed you when I should have thanked God you survived when so many did not. Can you ever forgive a foolish old woman?" Hampton stood frozen for a moment, then seemed to collapse inward slightly, years of hurt and anger draining away. "Mother," he choked out, and suddenly they were embracing, both crying, Helena stepping back to give them space for their reunion. They stayed in Pennsylvania for 2 weeks, and in that time, Hampton and his mother mended fences that had been broken for nearly a decade. Mrs. Xavier doted on her grandson, held him for hours, sang him the same songs Hampton remembered from his own childhood. She listened as Hampton told her about his life in Arizona, about the false imprisonment in the mountain cabin, and the woman who had changed everything. "You found someone good," Mrs. Xavier said to Helena one afternoon, as they sat together watching Hampton play with Henry on the floor. "Someone who sees past the scars to the man beneath. That is a rare gift." He is a good man, Helena said simply, the best I have ever known. Take care of him, Mrs. Xavier requested. He acts strong, and he is strong, but he has been hurt deeply. He needs someone who understands that. I do understand, Helena assured her, because I have been hurt too. That is why we fit together so well. We understand each other's scars. When they finally departed, Mrs. Xavier made them promise to return the following year and to write frequently. Hampton agreed readily, and Helena could see the lightness in his step, the way he stood straighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The train ride back to Arizona was peaceful, Henry sleeping in his mother's arms while Helena leaned against Hampton's solid presence. "Thank you," Hampton said quietly, "for pushing me to do that, for understanding what I needed even when I did not." "That is what partners do," Helena replied. "We help each other become the best versions of ourselves." They returned to the mountain cabin to find it exactly as they had left it, untouched by humans, though animals had clearly investigated the property in their absence. Hampton reinforced the fences and checked the structure, while Helena cleaned and aired out the interior. It felt like coming home in the deepest sense, returning to the place they had built together, where they had found each other and created a family. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Henry grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Hampton taught him to track animals, to read the signs of weather and wildlife, to respect the land and the creatures that lived upon it. Helena taught him letters and numbers, reading and arithmetic, determined that her son would have education as well as practical skills. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Hope when Henry was 3, and another son named Harrison when Henry was 6. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family, Hampton building additional rooms with the same care he had brought to the original structure. They prospered modestly, Hampton's hunting and trapping supplemented by the guided expeditions he now offered to wealthy sportsmen from the east. Ash Fork gradually accepted them, though Reverend Pierce remained hostile until his death from pneumonia in the winter of 1885. The new minister, a younger man with more progressive views, made overtures of friendship that Hampton and Helena cautiously accepted. Their children attended church socials and eventually school in town, boarding during the week with a friendly family and returning to the mountain cabin on weekends. Helena sometimes thought about the woman she had been when she arrived in Ash Fork so many years earlier. Desperate, hunted by her past, convinced that peace and happiness were beyond her reach. That woman would barely recognize the person she had become, a confident wife and mother, respected in the community, secure in the love of a good man and the family they had built together. One evening in the autumn of 1890, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Hampton reached over and took Helena's hand. Their children were inside preparing for bed, their voices carrying through the open windows, the sounds of a happy, secure household. "Do you ever regret it?" Hampton asked. "Leaving everything behind, coming here, tying yourself to a man like me?" Helena turned to look at her husband. He was 42 now, his beard heavily streaked with gray, lines weathered deep around his eyes. But he was still strong, still protective, still the man who had looked at her broken past and seen possibility instead of shame. "Never," she said firmly, "not for a single moment. You gave me a life when mine was over. You gave me love when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose. How could I possibly regret any of that?" Hampton lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I am the one who should be grateful. You saved me, Helena. I was so lost, so isolated, so convinced that I would never be anything more than my mistakes. But you saw something worth saving. You gave me a reason to be better." "We saved each other," Helena corrected. "That is what people with pasts do. We understand that everyone deserves a second chance, that redemption is possible, that love can grow even in the hardest soil." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded and the first stars emerged in the darkening sky. From inside the cabin came the sound of their children laughing, and Helena felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful in its intensity. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfection, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love and purpose and partnership. It was in the strong hand holding hers, the cabin full of voices, the mountains standing eternal watch around them. It was in the journey they had taken together, from broken and judged to whole and accepted. As winter approached that year, Hampton received a letter from his mother informing them that she was unwell. They made the trip to Pennsylvania with all 3 children, and were there when Mrs. Xavier passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the family she had nearly lost to pride and pain. At the funeral, Hampton stood tall and dry-eyed, speaking of his mother's strengths and her courage in admitting her mistakes and seeking reconciliation. After settling his mother's modest estate, they returned west with a small inheritance that allowed Hampton to finally purchase the land their cabin sat on, securing it legally for future generations. He also bought property in Ash Fork itself, building a small house where the family could stay during the harsh winter months, allowing the children easier access to school and Helena to the companionship of other women. The house in town became a gathering place for those who did not quite fit society's narrow definitions. Helena welcomed women who needed help, offered employment to those struggling to find acceptance, and gradually built a network of kindness that countered the judgment that had once driven her from civilization. Hampton, in turn, mentored young men who had fallen into trouble, offering them work and second chances just as he had once offered Helena. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Hampton surprised Helena with a gift, a beautifully bound journal with blank pages. "For your story," he explained. "I think you should write it down. Everything that happened, how we met, how we built this life. Our children should know the truth, not the sanitized version. And maybe someday, other people who are struggling will read it and realize that pasts can be overcome, that judgment is not the final word, that love is possible even when it seems impossible." Helena was moved to tears. That evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, she sat at the kitchen table and began to write. She wrote about Tombstone and the reverend's condemnation. She wrote about the massive mountain man who had looked at her with winter-gray eyes and offered her hope. She wrote about learning to process furs, about falling in love, about the storm that had brought them together. She wrote about judgment and redemption, about second chances and the courage it takes to choose love over fear. She wrote about building a life log by log, child by child, year by year. And she wrote about the truth that had sustained them through everything, that people with pasts understand each other in ways that those who have never struggled cannot comprehend. Years continued to pass. Henry grew into a man much like his father, strong, honorable, protective of those weaker than himself. He married a schoolteacher from Flagstaff and brought her to the mountains, building his own cabin not far from his parents. Hope became a nurse, driven to help others after seeing her mother's kindness in action. Harrison followed his own path, becoming a lawyer who specialized in defending those falsely accused, his father's story his constant inspiration. Hampton and Helena grew old together, their bodies slowing, but their love undiminished. On cold nights, they still sat before the fire, Hampton's arm around Helena's shoulders, talking about their lives, their children, their blessings. The scars of their pasts never fully faded, but they became integrated into the story of who they were. Not shameful secrets to hide, but evidence of survival, of resilience, of the journey that had brought them to each other. One spring morning in 1910, as they sat on the porch of the mountain cabin watching the valley come alive with new growth, Helena said, "We did it, you know. We built something real, something lasting." Hampton, his beard now fully white, his body still strong despite his 70 years, squeezed her hand gently. "We did. And I would not change a single moment, not the pain, not the struggle, not the judgment, because it all led here, to this." "To us," Helena added. "To us," Hampton agreed. They sat in the morning sunshine, two people who had been broken and discarded by a judgmental society, who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of purpose and love and legacy. Their story was not perfect, but it was true. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The reverend had warned the town that Helena Grayson had a past. Hampton Xavier had responded that he was glad, for she would understand his. And in that understanding, in that mutual recognition of pain and survival, they had found something rarer than gold and more valuable than any respectable reputation. They had found each other, And in finding each other, they had found home. Their children and grandchildren would tell their story for generations to come. The tale of the woman with a past and the mountain man who saw not shame but strength, not a liability but a partner, not someone to be saved but someone to build a life alongside. It became a story of hope, proof that love can bloom even in the hardest places, that second chances exist for those brave enough to reach for them, and that sometimes the people society rejects are the very ones who understand most deeply what truly matters. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the mountain valley they called home, Hampton and Helena sat together in peaceful silence, hands clasped, hearts intertwined, their past behind them and their legacy spreading through the children and grandchildren who carried forward the lessons they had learned, to judge less, to love more, to offer second chances, and to remember that everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves the opportunity to write a new chapter in their story. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to the love that had flourished in their shadow, and in the distance smoke rose from the chimneys of their children's homes, evidence that what Hampton and Helena had built together would endure long after they were gone. It was a good legacy, an honest legacy, and as they sat together in the sunlight, neither could imagine a better way to have spent their years. The woman with the past and the mountain man with his own scars had found each other, loved each other, built a family and a legacy together. And in doing so, they had proven that the past does not define the future, that love can conquer judgment, and that sometimes the very things society condemns us for are the experiences that best prepare us to build something real, something lasting, something beautiful. Their story ended not with drama or tragedy, but with quiet contentment. Two old people holding hands on a porch, surrounded by the life they had created together, secure in the knowledge that they had loved well, lived honestly, and left the world better than they found it. And really, what more could anyone ask from a life well lived?